Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dr. Philip Phillips. I'm the Associate Dean of the University Honors College here at MTSU. I'm very pleased to have a full house again. Of course, we have a really high enrollment in this class. We have 50 students in the class, and we very frequently have visitors. So this is not only a class, but it is an event that is free and open to the public. And the Honors College likes to select topics that are of relevance and importance, and I think climate change certainly falls within that definition, and certainly something that all of you have identified as being important to you. Another characteristic of the Honors Lecture Series is that we make our series multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary. So essentially what it means is that we will invite speakers from a variety of academic disciplines, mainly drawn from our honors faculty on the campus of MTSU, but we also invite speakers from off campus for their particular expertise. So one of the main goals of the series is to approach a topic from different perspectives and to learn from each other and learn from the experts, to ask questions and to engage in discussion about the topic. So today, I'm very pleased to welcome not one but two speakers. We have Dr. Kim Sadler, who's Professor of Biology Education, co-director of MTSU's Center for Cedar Glade Studies, and member of the Honors College faculty. And Dr. Cindi Smith-Walters, Professor of Biology, Director of MTSU's Environmental Education Center, and a recipient of the MTSU Foundation Award for Excellence in Public Service. They both specialize in environmental education in both formal and informal settings, and they have much to share with us today on the topic of climate change and how it is taught or not taught in our schools. Their topic today is, are K-12 educators teaching about climate change? So please join me in welcoming our speakers today.
Hey, I'm Dr. C. I'm so glad to be here. Kim asked me to come and talk with you about this particular topic because we've given several presentations to educators and some professional development.
And then a shout out to Dr. Smith-Walters, because she is Regional Director for the National Science Teachers Association, and actually I think stepping down after 3 years on the deck. But Dr. C has done lots of thinking about this topic. We're really excited to present some ideas to you today that are not our own novel research, but research of others that we think will be meaningful to you. So just a quick shout out about the survey. We will not, it's not a test, and yet we'd like for you maybe to reflect back to that as we move through some of the ideas we're going to talk about. Also, we made some copies of really great resources for you, so if there's some more reading you'd like to do, I'm assuming that you probably are already on board with that, but if you'd like some more, just a show of hands quickly, how many of you are destined to be education majors? Anybody in here majoring in education? Secondary? All right, well, we all have a lot to learn. So, Cindi, I'll let you go ahead and begin.
Well, we can tell them anything and they'll believe it, so I like that. So glad you are here. If you had one of those little half sheets, you got to mark something, I want you to sneak a peek at your neighbor. See what they wrote down. Just sneak a peek. Just sneak a peek. Okay. Now that sheet is from a climate change curriculum. The sheet's from a science resource and a climate change curriculum that's provided to teachers, some of whom buy materials, some of whom go to professional development and receive those materials so they can implement in their classroom. What we're going to do today, this is our roadmap. We're going to talk a little bit about terminology. I'm not sure how much you know about climate change or global warming, so we're going to do a little bit of terminology. We're going to talk about the science behind climate change. a little bit on a survey that teachers were given and what it revealed. You might be surprised about that. Then challenges when it comes to those teachers and implementing this particular area of study in their classroom. And then we're going to have some questions. So that kind of gives you a roadmap where we're going. First of all, when it comes to climate and weather. Climate is what you expect. Last spring, my husband and I went to Phoenix, Arizona. Never been there before. Stayed with a friend. She told me, you need to come before it gets really hot. Well, I went. I packed lots of summery kind of clothes with a couple of things I could layer, and it rained every day. Wasn't what I expected, but we think that climate is what you expect. What do you expect at the equator? What do you expect at the poles? What do you expect northern U.S., southern U.S.? It's what you expect. Weather, on the other hand, is what you actually get. So if you look outside today, you'll see we've got rain. It's what the forecaster on the local news tells you is going to happen, and they're pretty close. But weather is what you get. So global warming or climate change. Some things about global warming and climate change is that global warming is the measured increase in average temperature of the Earth. And we do know the Earth has gone through cooler and warmer periods. So think about the Ice Age. We know from ice cores and from different evidence that has been collected, the Earth has gone through different periods when the climate has changed. And we call it climate change when it's a statistically significantly changed. And we tend to look at 30 years at a time and look at what's happened over 30 years to help us make our predictions about what's going to happen in the future. Climate change today, we think, is being exacerbated due to human activity, and we'll give you a little information about that in just a moment. I like this particular word much better, climate disruption, because in the past our climate has changed several times. But when we say climate disruption, that's a little more ominous, and it also lets us know that this is not something that is natural according to the evidence that we've gathered. So here are the Earth's climate system components: atmosphere, ocean, land, etc. All of them interact with one another. All of them absorb heat at different rates. Think about ice. Ice is white, it's light in color, it reflects the sun's rays back into the atmosphere. The oceans surrounding that ice are darker in color. They absorb more of that solar energy and warm, and as they warm, they melt the stinking ice. So the more the ice melts, the more melting happens on the ice. So it's a feedback loop that is really changing what our poles look like. You may have heard in the news last week that Antarctica was 65 degrees. That's practically balmy compared to what it has been measured in the past. So all of these interact. We hear about weather events happening on the coast as that ocean next to the coast and into the deeper parts warms. It interacts with the air over it. The land absorbs that heat differently from the way the oceans do. And when those air masses meet, we end up with weather disruptions, with problems. So we're really thinking of pieces of the puzzle as they fit together, as they interact with each other. The greenhouse effect is a natural phenomenon. We know that carbon in the atmosphere acts like a blanket. Solar energy comes to the Earth. It is reflected back. That carbon in the atmosphere acts as a blanket to hold some of that heat in and back it to the Earth, where the other heat goes back out into space. So just like a blanket, the carbon holds heat next to the Earth. It allows us to have great weather. It allows plants and animals to survive and thrive and reproduce. It's good for life on Earth. It's really good. We find that carbon gets into the atmosphere naturally. Think about volcanic eruptions, puts carbon into the atmosphere. Think about forest fires that occur, carbon into the atmosphere. There's carbon that is released from the ocean, goes into the atmosphere. It's great. But we find that humans are adding extra greenhouse gases, such as CO2, to our environment. So there's a whole vocabulary that go with this particular phenomenon. So I've given you only a thumbnail sketch, and I'm sure you'll have other speakers that will go into more detail. So I think the greenhouse effect is a good thing, just like a greenhouse is good for plants to grow. But if we add too many blankets to the bed, it could be a bad thing. So here's energy use and carbon emissions from the year about 1700 through the year 2000, plus a little bit. And we find that the amount of carbon in the atmosphere tended to fluctuate up and down a little bit, not much, but what happens when we get past 1850, when the Industrial Revolution starts, when we start burning on a large scale forests, when we start burning on a large scale that coal that has been dug from the earth, when we start pumping oil and gas from the earth and using those as a fuel source, more of that carbon is getting added to the atmosphere. So we see a drastic increase in the amount of carbon, and we think that's more blankets than the bed needs. And we find that not only is the climate changing, we have areas where it's hot and it experiences even hotter temperatures, or areas where it's cold and it's experiencing even colder temperatures. Or we're seeing where the weather patterns fluctuate in such a way that there's too much rain at one time of year and not enough in the rest of the year. So we see some climate disruptions. That's the word that I like to use. So there was a national survey done. Dr. Sadler is going to talk to you about that survey and what it revealed about some teachers when it came to the teaching of climate change.
So this wasn't a study that Cindi and I conducted, although we do educational research, and if you're interested in anything related to that, we'd love to talk with you after the lecture about that. This is a really important study that was done because when you look in the literature about what's going on with the education system and climate science, it's very sketchy. So you'll find a study listed here that is anecdotal in nature. So that means that somebody just walked around and said, hey, what are you thinking? Hey, what do you think? Oh, okay, I'll publish this. And that's fine. This is new stuff. It's important for things to get out there. And then there'll be another study where an individual would have developed a survey, but that survey would have only been unique or specific to the particular area or environment in which those teachers were living, right? Or even the kids themselves. So the thing that made this study so important is because it was nationwide. And the sampling, there were 50 states that were represented in combination with the national, so the NCSE stands for the National Center for Science Education. And Penn State Survey Group, they kind of cooperated together and sent out, they had a database of something like 3.9 million teachers to sample from, but they were very intentional. So this is important that you understand this. So this wasn't just kind of a shotgun approach. This was an intentional sampling so that the individuals that were selected, it was very, very deliberate and had a decent response rate. And again, you know, whenever you send out a survey like this, anybody ever gotten anything like that in the mail, a survey? You know, it either goes in the shredding pile, or I got one the other day and it had a $2 bill in it. Are you kidding? Of course, yes, I'm all in. And that's what they did as well. So when they sent out a letter, we're going to be sending you a survey, and then the next letter had the survey. They included a $2 bill in it, And so, it was a well-vetted study. They knew exactly what they were doing. So I say this so that we can have high confidence in the kinds of things that we were able to figure out from that. And again, this was a Plutzer et al. There was a large number of individuals that were part of this research team, but it just was amazing. So analysis was weighted, so they were controlling for differences in responses that came from different places, et cetera, et cetera. And so what happens in the classroom? Well, it was really cool. This was very encouraging because more than 3/4 of public school science teachers devote at least one of their classes to talking about climate change, which is great. I think I need to back up here. The study sample included middle school and high school teachers only. And the reason for that is because the K-6 standards do not govern or guide anything about specifically global warming or climate change. Now, they do cover things that are related to that, for example, carbon cycling, biogeochemical cycles, the greenhouse effect is covered, and yet they really wanted to get a good snapshot of educators, teachers that have the opportunity to teach this. And it's really amazing to think about that 36 of our states have a mandated curriculum for teaching about global climate change. And that's really encouraging. There are, unfortunately, 4 that don't mention anything, and I won't mention those states. We're not one of them. But at any rate, that is concerning to think about, almost 10%. So the essential topics they found they were covering, and things like the greenhouse effect, the carbon cycle, the consequences. And here's something even more encouraging, is linking that science to action. So what can we do? And that's starts from the ground level and then can move on up to the policy level, which is probably where a lot of this actually lies. However, what they did find is that 30% of these teachers were sending mixed messages about scientific agreement. And this is where things get a little waffly, because if you're trying to portray something that as science as being a little bit edgy, and again, we do see that there's a lot of misunderstandings among the general public because they don't understand how science works. And so with that said, more of them, more than 1/4 of them, they gave time to perspectives that allow students to begin to have doubt. And again, the science stands as it is. It's not if you believe it to be true or not, right? And so the big question is why? Why are they doing this? So what the research reveals is these are that both the presenting both the scientific and the skeptic's perspective in certain situations where this is taught, it suggests that there's not consensus, right? So, and we know that we have 97% of climate scientists all agree that human activities are promoting the climate change that we see. And when students are encouraged to come to their own conclusion, well, where's that at? What's the basis for that? What's the framework for that? Because we're talking about something that's incredibly complex and something that, well, for example, you just can't go set up a climate change experiment in your backyard because this is something that has to be observed over time.
Can I interject something
Please.
here? You may be getting to that.
That's
I'm
all right.
not sure.
Jump in, girl.
We know that over half of the teachers that are teaching middle school and high school science are over 40 years old. Yes, old people are teaching science. And when they were going through teacher training, climate change was not an issue at all. They didn't even have 1 hour of one class that they took devoted to this. So here they are in the classroom. They've got students who want to know information, but they may be very ill prepared to help those students understand the nuances or the connections when it comes to climate change. So they may have misconceptions of their own. They may be relying on the media, which we know is sometimes not quite accurate. They may have only a brief introduction that they've gotten at a professional development or from their personal reading. So they may not feel prepared, and because they don't feel prepared, they see this as a controversial issue when it shouldn't be at all.
Yeah, and in fact, it is not. Thanks, Cindy. No, heck, jump in whenever you. And so engaging in debate also incorrectly puts forward that this is scientific controversy. We see some similar things along the same lines as evolution. Interestingly enough, that teachers, they rate themselves as below their peers. So when asked, how do you rate yourself relative to the person who's teaching in the classroom next to you? And they're not confident about this. And the other, as Cindi said, and again, less than half of them had any formal coursework on this. And what we have found also is that the textbooks are sketchy as well. So it's really not a good balance in the materials that teachers are using. Also, the understanding of the greenhouse effect is weak. So with this survey, the teachers were asked they were given an array of topics. And teachers were asked to respond to which of these topics would they teach related to climate change. And one that kept coming up was the ozone layer, which maybe indirectly you could say is related to that, but not directly. And also other things, the use of herbicides and pesticides. So there's some confusion that exists. And so these are the people who are teaching, maybe you guys got taught by one of those teachers, teaching our students. And less than half of them are aware that, of course, more than 80% of climate scientists think human activities are increasing the rate of global warming. And yet only 2/3 of them see human activities as the primary cause. So again, this kind of moves into just being unsure, not staying on top of the science as it exists. And yet this is what's really encouraging. And Washington State put aside maybe a big, like $4 million specifically for climate science professional development. So this is where teachers have an opportunity to go and learn a lot more from people who are in the know. And so you could kind of see how this bubbles up. Again, moves into a policy issue as well. And so how do you negotiate? This is socially controversial, right? There's nothing scientifically controversial about this. And interestingly enough, unlike evolution, very few report that they're under any pressure to teach or not to teach. So there's nothing coming in from the outside about this that, hey, my kids, when you're teaching climate change, my kid's not coming to school that day, which teachers do see that when the topic of evolution is coming up, which again is an abiding cornerstone of the diversity of life. The awareness of the scientific consensus, it's directly related to the political beliefs of the individuals. And so that was clear, came out very, very clearly. People were very leery of big government. Again, they were also leery of climate change as well. And again, that's not surprising. And most of them are unaware. So less than 50%, and I think that counts for most, it's actually 48%, they're unaware of the degree of scientific consensus on the causes of global warming. And again, this is concerning. So these are middle school teachers, these are high school teachers, and for those of you, I guess since nobody's an education major in here, if you're going for a 7 through 12 certification to teach in the public schools, then you are a content master. So that means if you're majoring in biology because you're going to teach biology, you major in that and then you minor in education. And so these folks have come through science programs. So that's also something to consider as well. And so what are the grand challenges? Well, one is, of course, it's interdisciplinary, but here we go. Well, we've got the physics teacher and the chemistry teacher, the biology teacher, and then of course you've got electives, environmental science, et cetera, et cetera. And all of these disciplines need to be talking to each other and have a uniform conversation about this idea. For example, earth science teachers, 90% of them in this study, they of course, they talk about climate change. But then when you looked at other individuals, it was a completely different percentage. This requires, so this is to me, I think teaching climate change is really the essence of the process of science, of understanding how this works. In the sense that, you know what, you've got to look at the data. And the thing I love about the way that this seminar is set up is that you have individuals coming to talk about the big data that's out there. It's overwhelming at one level. And then how are they controlling for all these variables It's going to be a wonderful story for you all to hear. And just picture, though, that because it is complex, so due to the spatial and temporal issues that are associated with this, the complexity needs to sort of be watered down, if you will. But let's come back to the data. So you've got this wonderful opportunity to bring data, all different kinds. So if you're a biology teacher, you can look at the changes, the vegetative changes. Oh my gosh, a really cool one would be the movement of, let's talk, ticks. So what's going to happen? So what are the models that are projecting what will happen to the ticks? I mean, are they moving out? And of course, as we see change processes occurring, they do. So they're moving into a bigger area. Again, but 60% of teachers, they couldn't appreciate the science that supports this. Perfect opportunity. Look at those big data sets, have the students analyze this information. And again, as Cindi said earlier, climate is calculated based on a 30-plus year average. So you're looking at multiple years and give students something that they can really dig into and think about. But 60% of teachers thought that you could do an experimental controlled experiment. So you have a control over here and then you manipulate over here. It doesn't work like that. This is a descriptive story that we're talking about. And again, we need to begin thinking systematically about the energy budget, climate systems, and climate change collectively. So it has been a pleasure to speak with you all about this. And I really, really like this cartoon. And Cindi and I will be glad to take questions if you all have any. So thank you so much. Cindi, if you could come on up here if we've got questions.
I have a question. So if there's 40% currently of the middle school, high school teachers that are over 40 and have to teach climate change, but they don't have the background, what is currently being done now for those who are in program like MTeach or other certification program in terms of teaching climate change? And is it, even though it's not in K-6 curriculum, is it been addressed at that level at all?
Well, the foundation.
I'll talk about that.
You go for it.
And you can add too.
Okay.
But there's a set of standards called the Next Generation Science Standards that are standards that NSF has put together to help guide what is taught at different levels. And it's not content specific. It talks about the skills of science and how science disciplines are interconnected with each other, and that there are certain themes that run through science. One of those themes has to do with matter and energy movement. There you go. There's the climate change piece. So those Next Generation Science Standards have been adopted by a number of states, and they have mandates through those standards and through their state departments of education to teach something in the way of climate change. Tennessee does not do NGSS. We have our own standards. They're much like NGSS.
They totally are. And they're pretty robust, too.
And it contains a suggestion, a strongly worded suggestion, since it's a state science standard, that climate change is included. But as Kim said, who's talking about it in the classroom? And you ask about how teachers are being prepared. I can't speak to that. I know that I cover it in an elementary, middle grades content course in life science that I teach, but I could not speak for a chemistry person, couldn't speak for an introductory biology class, can't speak for chemistry class, physics, etc., as I said.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right.
anything
Yep.
to add to that?
That's great.
Thank you. Hope I answered your question, Lisa.
Yes.
Near the beginning of your lecture, I think you mentioned that 97% of scientists agree that humans
Climate
are,
scientists.
great. Okay, climate scientists. Thank you. Agree that humans are a contributing or a major contributing cause to the environment. Then later, or to the climate change. Later, the slide said 80% of scientists agree that climate change is majorly, or that's not the right word, contributed by humans. Those two different statistics or two different surveys.
I am so glad that you raised that point. So one was the survey, and what the survey did is it gave a range of 80 to 95. And so that's what that's in reference to. So if they selected that, so 80 to 95%, I left off that range as it was narrated in the paper, they said more than 80. So that was it. Does that make sense? So it's 80. So the teachers selected that option, that 80% or more scientists are in consensus about climate change being caused by human activities. Does that make sense?
And they were offered
Did I
a
clarify?
range from 0 to 100 on how.
So they had segments of that. So their survey was segmented out. So this, 0 to 25, et cetera, et cetera. Did I clarify?
Yes, ma'am.
So where did the 97 come from?
So where did the number 97 come from? I guess a joint.
It was a survey that was done with
AAAS.
climate scientists specifically. You might call them earth scientists, but scientists who look at climate and weather. And it was a survey that was done, and I forget the organization that did that. But that's where the 97 came from. And I was blown away when I heard that. You'll hear in the local, in media, they'll say, 97% of scientists agree. Scientists don't all agree. Climate scientists do, and they're the ones that are going to be more familiar with the data when it comes to climate. So, the question right here.
So you said that there wasn't a lot of pressure from outside sources like parents and stuff, saying, hey, don't teach, this, hoax to my kids. But then you went on to say that it was a, kind of socially controversial issue, which, of course it is. It's not controversial in the sciences. So my question is, do you expect that as we increase that climate change education, that we're going to see more pushback from parents and things, saying, hey, don't teach this lie to my kids and stuff, instead of, kind of, at least like you said, we still see that happening with evolution even after all of this time, right?
Yeah, I think that's, so the question was, would we expect pushback as we move into the story of climate change? And I think, if anything, I think that we're going to continue to educate students appropriately. I think, and really where it lies is, of course, educating our teachers, right? Because they impact so many. And I think that's the secret right there, is improving our teacher education programs and moving from that point forward.
Would it limiting debate over climate change hurt these kids' critical thinking skills if we don't allow them to have those kind of conversations? Even though we can use facts, and obviously that can be used in debate. Where you kind of, yeah, do you know what I'm saying? I was just kind of wondering, would it limiting the debate over climate change hurt these people's critical thinking skills?
There shouldn't be a debate about climate change.
Well, I agree. Climate change is obviously happening based on all the facts, but shouldn't we allow for some discussion of what's happening?
Oh, absolutely, and that's the nature of science.
Yeah, but okay, I think I'm just arguing semantics then, I'm sorry. Yeah, about debate, whether conversation versus debate.
That's what science should always do, is to collect as much evidence as possible and make a stand and move it forward. At one time, we thought the earth was flat. And that was the leading science of the time. Currently, because of the cell theory, we say every living thing is composed of one or more cells. I think that's going to go out the window pretty soon, because we're looking at viruses possibly being living things. And I would arm wrestle with some biology folks here at MTSU who already say viruses are living. So we should continue to gather data, and that data should be available to those teachers.
Question over here. May I add, it's not as simple as establishing if climate change is occurring and what the consensus is. You have a separate question as to what the public policy implications are. I mean, one could conclude that there's climate change and one could do little about it, or one could conclude that we could spend $100 billion on it, or we could conclude that we need a worldwide effort. And I think that sort of goes, I mean, I'm a little concerned too. It seems like every other area we do want discourse about things. If we present it as indoctrination, you're indoctrinated people don't have, I mean, they're not have the same passion as if they understand what we're saying. So, I think I just wonder in some of these answers if the teachers aren't trying to let you know that we're not just presenting it as, I'm the teacher and you have to accept this. We're trying to tell you what we believe the scientific consensus to be.
I think that's a really good point. And actually, Cindi and I had discussed this. And, we're at an interesting time because ExxonMobil in the 60s and the 70s, man, they laid it all out. I mean, memos and papers published and internal review. I mean, they knew what was coming. And yet now a consequence of that is we're going to plant more trees and something else. Seems like it was something else, but it's more than that, right? There was nothing in what they're pushing out. I mean, you see on the advertisements where they've got we're doing algae and we're planting more trees, singing Kumbaya. Where are we talking about our energy consumption and the burning of fossil fuels and people who figure out these data? There's $27 trillion worth of reasons why. And so that's something, we do all have personal responsibility. And I think that's where engaging in debate, as you raise that question, I think it is important because exactly, we just don't want to be fact mongers. We need to be able to understand.
Do you think the inconsistencies in teaching about climate change is mirrored in the inconsistencies of our government about it? Because I think there are some mixed priorities.
Okay, again,
So state that again.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I heard your question correctly.
Especially in an election cycle, we're hearing about a bunch of different priorities that people are fighting for. And I think that there's inconsistencies in the teachings in whether or not teachers are even teaching or mandated to teach climate change across the nation. Do you think that's just a side effect of a distracted government, so to speak?
I think some of the government is giving out mixed messages, truly, because you'll hear one thing and it has a governmental agency that supports it, and you'll have something else that sounds very different with a different governmental agency. So I think there's some inconsistencies within the information that we get. And so again, the nature of science, we need to collect as much evidence as possible, and we need to look at the sources of that evidence.
there was a situation that came up in New Hampshire, this was in January of 2019, where a representative put forward a bill that mandated that climate change, this is a former high school teacher, be taught, not in high school, but at all grade levels, starting from pre-K on. And she was challenged by another representative who was on the board of the Heartland Institute. And what the Heartland Institute did is they did a mass mailing, unsolicited, to thousands and thousands of teachers throughout the country that refuted global warming and climate change. And so you have that going on, and it creates a great deal of confusion, I think, when individuals are, so polarized. Her bill, of course, bit the dust. It came through in another fashion eventually. And yet, I think it created a great deal of confusion among individuals that were wondering, why is this becoming part of our legislation when this is something that the schools should be dealing with?
So, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So you guys mentioned that you were doing workshops for educators who didn't have a background. Are those required? And if they are not, do you think that they should be?
Teachers are supposed to have X amount of professional development each year. That professional development depends on the school system and what they approve. It's not approved through the State Department of Ed. So that PD might be classroom management, the PD may be a content PD, it may be teaching strategies, and the teacher essentially selects what they have professional development on. We did just a 1-hour session at the Tennessee Science Teachers Association last November. And we probably had 45 teachers who wanted more information.
And it was at a bad time, and we were over by the avenue, so go figure. 4 o'clock, we had 45, I was stunned.
I
And
thought they'd go
encouraged.
shopping for Christmas.
Yeah, I was encouraged.
So I'm a little disappointed that they only spend one day on it. I mean, I look at this whole system and I think the failure of education is we try to cover too many topics over a period of time instead of really taking the ones that we consider to be major topics and having somebody be able to understand them well enough to have that discourse that you wanted to have. And, you know, one time tells me that that's a throwaway in most cases. That's just my take
Right.
on a
Yeah,
topic.
one class.
Yeah, one class. I mean, that's what, 40 minutes if we don't have a get-together that day in high school or middle school. I mean, we all know that, you know, it's an interesting system, right? I mean, that's one class. So I worry that I'm more than positive they're spending way more time on other things than one class. But this is a topic that's, I think, lots of people would think is important. How do you change that? You know, how do you change it so that the standards aren't so great that you can't ever get a handle on any topic and really feel comfortable? Because that's the teachers are struggling with the same thing the students are, right? They're never getting enough of it to be comfortable with the topic, to have that discourse, to be able to come to a conclusion and logically work through, as you said, having that talk. So how do you handle that? I mean, that's always my fear with.
It's a great question. And, you know, we've moved into this era of standardized testing. And right, so who's got the plunger? Get the plunger. So today it's photosynthesis. All right, tomorrow it's here we, you know, and that's a travesty. But it's how our educational system in public schools is designed. Maybe other schools, there's different opportunities. Maybe some of you have that opportunity. I mean, somebody homeschooled, goodness, that's your whole curriculum. It would be fabulous.
So how are you seeing some of the changes with the new STEAM and the engineering and the more thought-provoking that's starting to come in? I don't know what that's called because I don't work with you guys anymore and I'm out of my language, but when we go in and teach in the classroom, we're starting to see some of that thought process coming back, and it makes me go back to your slide, Cindi, at the first one, we're talking about the systems and the systems approach, so that you're understanding all the processes and how they come together and how they're bigger pieces. So the ecology part of it, you're not just talking about climate change, you're talking about the Earth system as a whole climate. And I cannot ever remember this documentary, but NASA did a fantastic documentary on the Earth systems and what we're learning from the satellites in space and what they're telling us. And I mean, I feel like that approach kind of ties in a way. I don't know how the STEAM and the engineering and that is coming together, but kind of look at it from a bigger, broader system approach, like you were saying.
It's being more widely accepted. For example, National Science Teaching Association has started having STEAM conferences where not just science teachers attend, but we've got language arts teachers who are thinking about writing scientifically for science literacy in their own classes, that we've got social studies and government type teachers who are coming in. So we're seeing more being offered to a wider variety of teachers. So it's not just the biology teacher's job, or it's not just the earth science teacher's job. So we're seeing more of that. But again, it's not mandated, and it depends on the school system and how flexible they are as far as letting teachers work together. So that's a great hope that it will continue and be a larger effort on a larger scale.
And really, those were just introduced in 2018, where we really hit the ground. So maybe we'll see. I'm hopeful.
Because it seems like they're inviting more people. I mean, this year, just all of a sudden, I mean, I know like when Sarah Jesse was promoting that several years ago, it's kind of been out there, but we're seeing a lot more where the teachers are inviting and really wanting the specialists in that field to come into the classroom and talk to. So, I don't know, I just was encouraged. I was really encouraged about what they were teaching the second graders on a different topic. And I feel like, you know, that thought process can be useful in this, you know, topic.
And more wide-ranging.
I agree. So there, let's see, one back and then one in the front. So we'll, real loud.
So I'm like moving into non-traditional education for kids in park systems. And this is something like I was raised in a time of being told that the ozone layer is going to basically break into a million pieces and we're all going to die, you know. So I don't know, my own background on this is already mixed, and any kind of personal research on it is politically based, and I have no interest in that either. So even getting on JSTOR or, you know, Google Scholar or something like that, it's hard to find something that doesn't seem to be politically biased or motivated in a certain direction. So what is your suggestion for finding information that is not, you know, to educate not only yourself but something you pass to children, you know, that is awesome and good and, you know.
I have just the thing for you.
What a good segue.
Yeah.
I'll give you your 20 after we
Yeah.
leave.
Well, I think we have one more question, and I think we need to wrap it up. Yeah.
I was just wondering, as far as like, it's obvious that there's a big push for educating all of the future teachers and all of the teachers right now that are like over 40 or anything that don't have a mixed background. But is there any push for after school hours for parents or other members of the community to be educated? Have you heard any?
I am not aware of any undertow like that at all, but Kim may be, I don't know.
So in the study that was done, they did mention that they excluded that audience. Obviously, we see natural history museums,
Nature centers.
yeah, all doing lots of things. But that actually, so your question is a good one, but it's beyond me even knowing what to tell you. So thank you so much. This was wonderful to be able to spend this time with you. And come see us.